Understanding from the method of the SIDDHA'S continued. It is always the same. Everyone is like that. He wasn't extraordinary. He just played the obvious drama that he played. He was good. I appreciated his questions. It was good that something that dramatic or emotional could take place. You should read the documents which record the history and teaching in the ashrams of various teachers, such as Ramana Maharshi or Sri Ramakrishna. It is always the same thing. This ashram is not going to be any different. Questioner: would you please speak about this contraction and how the form of inquiry you describe in the knee of listening passes beyond all the forms of separation? Franklin: a lot of words could be used. The traditions describe different knots that are opened, and the goal of spiritual life is often said to be the opening of these various knots. There is a knot in the navel, a knot in the heart, and a knot in the head. There are many knots, but these are perhaps the primary regions discussed in the traditions. What they are really talking about are functional forms of contraction in the organic and subtle processes of life. The chakras, or subtle centers through which the life force moves, are like the lens of a camera. When they are contracted and closed, no force flows. If there is a force trying to make them open, the resistance of the contraction creates pain, heat, and all the various yogic manifestations, many of which are described in the knee of listening. As a living center of consciousness opens a little bit more, then the mind begins to get a little flowery. So there are these little visionary things and perceptions and insights. When it is completely open, there is just the intuitive force of consciousness and bliss. Then the life force moves on until it hits the next obstruction. The life force is ultimately the force of the very heart, the God life, the power of reality, moving through the various centers of life, which are chronically obstructed or contracted, and the various experiences associated with the release of these centers are called the process of yoga or spiritual life. But what is ultimately the case is not all of these experiences. They just take place because there are obstructions. If there are no obstructions, there is only absolute consciousness, no dilemma, nothing to be accomplished. There is no body in which to accomplish anything. Therefore, one in whom understanding and inquiry are perfected passes from limited and even extraordinary forms of knowledge and experience into the intuitive and spontaneous life of reality or God. Questioner: is the activity of the mind and thought an obstruction? Franklin: what is your experience? Questioner: my experience is that in spite of what I will or wish, I have lots of strange thoughts. Franklin: if you close the eyes meditatively, you turn yourself mainly to concentration and mind forms. But if your eyes are open, there are people, functional demands, and the whole cosmic event. And while you are sitting there with your eyes open, you will become aware that all of this thought is going on. You will begin to feel, almost see, how thought slides between you and all contact with the moving world. Thought is an actual solid obstruction. It is a form of matter, a modification of energy. What we call our mind is mind lengths of force, functioning, taking on forms, through the subtle processes of electrical interchange. So when you have a thought, you have modified the energy flowing through the brain regions. In other words, you have contracted it, and you are always concentrating on that contraction. If you pinch your arm, attention centers at the point of pain. If you have a thought, attention centers at the point of thought. Whenever there is distraction by a particular entity, form, function, or whatever, there is loss of direct awareness of relationship. When there is concentration, everything else is excluded. The ego is just another form of concentration, of distraction. In the case of the ego, the distraction is not a particular thought, but the separate self-sense that all contraction generates. The ego is an activity, not an entity. The ego is the activity of avoidance, the avoidance of relationship. Therefore, any thought, any function, anything that creates form, that appears as form, that seems form, is produced by concentration or contraction. Thus, apart from understanding, all processes, even life itself, tend to become an obstruction. The root of it all is called the ego, but it is actually contraction in countless forms, endured without consciousness. The absence of consciousness is the key, not the acts of concentration themselves, which are only more or less functional. Apart from consciousness, functional contraction tends to become the assumed condition of life. Consciousness contraction creates separation, which unconscious contraction creates separation, which manifests as identification or the sense of separate self. The root of spirituality is not some activity like desire that seeks to get you to the upper object. Genuine spirituality is understanding of the whole process of motivation. It is to recognize the root of it, this contraction, this separation. When you no longer have any options, when you have worn yourself out doing your number, and you have tried all the trips and methods, paths and lifestyles, strategies and places to go, all the forms of concentration, whatever they are, then all of that begins to break down. You discover that you just don't have the jazz left to really carry it on anymore. You find yourself more depressed, just a little bit too much depressed to meditate or to hunt for sex. You just don't have the jazz, the necessary fire of motivation. Then upsetness begins to overwhelm you. The crisis begins to come on. You don't really have a path anymore. You may talk a lot about it, feel a lot about it. It remains a part of your mind, but you don't really have a path any longer. That is really the most hopeful sign. The guy is beginning to rot, when fruit begins to rot, when it falls with seed into the earth. But as long as a man is very righteous, as long as he has got his trip, he is not ripe. It is only when the trip begins to kick him in the face that he begins to soften up, bruise a little bit, feel his fear, his suffering, his dilemma, his constant upset of all our morality. We're all going to die. We're all going to lose this awareness, this enjoyment. I can't enjoy that dilemma from day to day. From the moment I was born, that upset me. I wasn't the least interested in tolerating moment-to-moment existence as that kind of suffering. Life wasn't worth the involvement of its summation had to be death, 0. Life wasn't worth the involvement if its summation had to be death, 0. What difference does it make how turned on I can get if I must fall out the bottom arbitrarily? Everything is wonderful today, but you wake up tomorrow and the world of lovely friends is delivered to you dead, the insane parcels of everything disappearing. So all righteousness, all ordinary spirituality, or the search for consolation is nonsense. It is a refusal. It is unreal. The usual perception is that of the agonizing fact of identification, the act that is ego, this refusal of one another, this lovelessness, and this living craziness. And all of your ordinariness, your ordinary processes are bound up with that craziness until you begin to get sick of it. Then you are no longer talking about your trip, your yoga, how groovy it is and how you're going to get there. Everything is so beautiful and all this crap. You will become obsessed with your darkness, your heaviness. You will try to feel good, but you know you will feel lousy. You really feel upset. It is really bad. It is really an annoyance. You are only upset, so what difference does the search make? If you go through that long enough, you begin really to get upset, and your meditation becomes concentration on your upset. Whereas before you were always doing your number to avoid that upset, now you can't do anything but be upset. And while you are meditating on your upsetness, you happen to get involved here in this ashram, and you can get even more and more upset all the time. You come to me and I make you more upset. You think you are supposed to be having a very groovy spiritual experience here, becoming more and more turned on. But when you come around, people yell at you. They call your attention to your crazy number. You're trying to do your best, but everybody is hitting you over the head. All such experience is very aggravating, but it begins to reinforce the real meditation that has now started to go on in you. It is this crisis, this falling apart, this rot, and it will persist until you begin to observe somehow this activity of yours. When you begin to see what you are doing, when you begin to recognize it, you will see it first of all in very direct human terms. You will see it in the simple human practical things that you do. Later you'll begin to see it in subtler ways. You will observe the whole quality of your mind, your ordinary activity, your game, the drama, the event that is always going on, until you begin to see it most precisely and in a very subtle way. When you see it absolutely, that is radical understanding. When you see the thing itself, the simple thing, that is the end of it, you fall apart, you scream, or you can't see anything, but it just ends. All of a sudden, the whole process is not going on anymore, and its apparent event, unlike all other apparent forms of action in the manifest worlds, is not followed by any reaction. In the Knee of Listening, I have described this event in my own case. When there was this simple radical turnabout, there was nothing about it that would have appeared remarkable to anyone who might have observed me. I didn't smile. I didn't feel high. There was no reaction to that event because there wasn't anything left over of the thing that now was thrown away. There was no thing to which I could react. There was no one to react, to feel good about it, happy about it. There was no peculiar emotion to the event itself. The heart was all. Its quality became more and more apparent. There was a preliminary period of that fundamental enjoyment which lasted for perhaps several months. During that time, there was no longer this whole complex life in dilemma, but I didn't really function in any way different than before. I didn't experience any comparative impression about the event. I didn't really see or interpret it clearly and fully for a good period of time, even though I consciously enjoyed a state that was untouched, unqualified by any event or circumstance which would seem remarkable in itself. But I hadn't begun to function as it in relation to manifest life. Only when I did so, and then only gradually, was I able to estimate and know my own event. It was as if I had walked through myself. Such a state is perfectly spontaneous. It has no way of watching itself. It has no way to internalize or structure itself. It is divine madness. The self, the heart, is perfect madness. There is not a jot of form within it. There is no thing. No thing has happened. There is not a single movement in consciousness, and there is its blissfulness. It was not the fact that certain functions of internal life had been stimulated. It was peculiarly free of vision, movement, and all the blissful phenomena characteristic of the activities of Yoga Shakti. And when such phenomena did happen to arise, they were of another kind, or they were known from a new point of view. Their qualities had become cosmic and universal rather than yogic or personal in nature, until there is only God, the living one. The mind acts as an obstruction. When the process of understanding begins in you, you will inquire of yourself, as I have described in the knee of listening. You will inquire of the mind. You will inquire in this moment of thinking, and you will understand it. When consciousness moves into relationship, the mind falls away. The mind is replaced by a form of intensity. The more that simple intensity is enjoyed as existence, the less obtrusive the mind becomes. Even though it continues to arise, it becomes less and less obtrusive. You notice it less. Now you think you are the mind. You are thinking, but it is actually something that is arising in consciousness. It is only a modification of your own nature. The man of understanding simply does not notice the mind in the usual way. It is not that he has quieted his mind. He is not his mind. There is no one there to be the mind. The mind is simply, in inverted commas, is simply one of the functions that spontaneously arises. But if you identify with it, then you have already separated yourself. Only when that whole structure of the separate self is undermined by radical perception of its root does thought resume its natural state. Ramana Maharshi advised seekers to find out who it is that asks the question, thinks the thought, whoever, whatever. The who is not an entity. When Maharshi spoke, he used the symbology and language of Advaita Vedanta, the classic monistic or only one reality school of Hindu philosophy. The imagery of this way of describing the process of truth deals in statics, things in space. So there is the ego, the objectified, solidified self. But I speak more in terms of process or movement. I speak in terms of concepts of experience with which the modern mind is more familiar and which is more appropriate in this time and place. I do not speak of the ego as an object within a conceptual universe of objects because we think in terms of process, energy. Therefore, the concept of the static ego is not terribly useful. It doesn't communicate our actual experience. To say seek the I, find out who the I is not terribly meaningful because we don't approach the conscious nature from the mental structure assumed by that question. But we all are dealing with activity, with process, movement. Therefore, what is called the ego in the traditions is more appropriately and conclusively recognized by us to be an activity. An understanding is that recognition, that direct seeing of the fundamental and always present activity that is our suffering, ignorance, distraction, motivation and dilemma. When this activity is thus known again, there is spontaneous and unqualified enjoyment of what it excludes, that which is always already the case, always already there. The process I describe as understanding is ultimately the same that Maharshi was describing. The same state or enjoyment is being communicated and served. It is the same force of truth. It is all absolutely the same. The thing is that since we are all presently existing, we cannot simply and naively embrace the fixtures that we have inherited. There must be conscious recognition of our present condition. Therefore, the old concepts and methods are simply not useful. Even though they are maybe pleasant and consoling, there must be an absolute penetration of the form of life. Thus, it must be approached with the living, present structure in which it is suffering. Questioner: on this basis, how does formal meditation stand? You don't seem to think that formal meditation has much great benefit. Franklin: if you understand what you call your formal meditation, that understanding is meditation. The understanding of your activity is meditation. If you have an inclination to do some particular kind of sitting, concentrating, yoga method, whatever, All of that is an activity that you are already tending to do. The point is not whether to do that or not. The point is the understanding of the whole ordinary motivation, the process in this moment that is producing this particular tendency, that is formal meditation. Intelligence is the fundamental meditation. Consciousness is itself meditation. The usual man is always already seeking, so it is not a matter of doing or not doing some particular kind of motivated search. We are always already seeking, whether at this moment we are doing it in the form of yogic technique, or the next moment we are doing it in the form of a slight glance at somebody as we pass down them in the street. We are always already doing it, so it is not the point whether we should do a particular form of it or not. There is simply and always the process of our own action. When there is the engagement of action by real and motivated intelligence, understanding begins to develop as a spontaneous real process in consciousness. As this process of intelligence matures, it tends to appear to become a little more formal, so that perhaps the man actually sits down, actually seems to meditate for a whole half hour or an hour or even longer periods. He may appear to everyone else as if he is doing what they are recognizing to be formal or, more properly, motivated meditation, but that is not in fact what he is doing. He is living consciousness. It is just that, from a practical point of view, if the body is relaxed, sitting in a natural pose in which its fluids and energies can move freely, such is an appropriate manner in which to enjoy the critical activity of real intelligence. Even so, the same intelligence can be active under any conditions, formal or random and circumstantial. There is simply the endless return to this recognition of our own activity, the gathering of our ashram, our conversion altogether, our sitting together, the reading or study we do, our life with one another. Everything we do constantly reawakens this recognition in some form or other, through crisis, endurance of the resistance of our suffering, whatever. As we pass through ordinary life in this way, and we see this same quality, always this same disturbance, that seeing, that understanding, which is to be no longer trapped in the unconscious process of action, is meditation. And such meditation is the necessary foundation of all spiritual activity, the life of truth. The form that arises in consciousness at any moment is the avoidance of relationship. It is the obstruction. The whole quality that arises in consciousness, which appears as forms of body sense, awareness of life, thought, the whole spontaneous event of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep is, in itself, the avoidance of relationship in the usual man. Whatever arises is a manifestation of this same process. Once you begin to recognize it, once you catch the little pieces that are prominent, then you begin to see yourself fully. Understanding begins in that way, in very practical observation, in the real observation of something that is obviously and practically a hindrance, an avoidance of the condition of relationship. When real observation of that kind has begun in you, this intelligence that is understanding has a practical basis. To that degree, you are able to respond with the intelligence of understanding to the events that arise in you, for you. The more there is of this recognition, of this practical recognition, the more understanding has become your intelligence. At the point when you really begin to see the all-embracing technique and strategy of life, when you really begin to see the structure of your suffering, at that point, the form of inquiring I have recommended in the knee of listening becomes a natural extension of consciousness, and it may appear to be used in a very formal way, but its use is rooted in understanding itself. Genuine inquiry in the form avoiding relationship is utterly dependent on prior understanding. Without understanding, inquiry is just like anything else. It is just a question in the head. It is just another preference. And understanding itself depends on satsang, the company and conditions generated by the Siddha Guru, one who lives truth in the world. People do in fact tend to use the inquiry as a method, They may read about it, or they may even have begun to engage themselves in the preliminary stages of life in the ashram, and they begin to meditate by using this form of inquiry or some other form of looking at themselves. But in such cases, inquiry is always used in the spirit of method and seeking. Everything tends to become the search until understanding or real intelligence is alive. But even though such people are going on with all of that, still doing their number, if they are involved in the conditions of this work, everything will eventually break down. If only a person has the endurance for it, or the need for it, the looseness for it, or only the inability to go out and play his game again, whatever it is, some such inner quality must keep a man or woman in place, so this work can take hold of them, in them. And the highest or most potent inner quality is faith, devotion, and surrender to Guru. Da.